Welcome back, Guiding Bolt Gaming fans. Today's the day we're going live with our battles. In parts 1 through 3 of combat design, we learn how to build combats that are more engaging and fun for our players to partake in. All of that can go to waste though if we aren't running our combats well during an actual session. So today we're going to wrap up our mini-series on generating better D&D combats by now focusing on how to run combat during live gameplay. The first thing we need to discuss is initiative. Please don't make this process world hunger. It should be quick and efficient. I would recommend using one of two methods. First, use the clothespin method like our group does. We have a video that highlights our setup, but essentially, each player has a clothespin that's already marked with important information like their AC. We call out one name at a time, the player gives their initiative number, and their clothespin is placed on the dowel. It's very quick and fuss-free. The second method is honestly using a sheet of plain old notebook paper. Again, we go around the table and get one initiative number at a time. If someone has a 14, for example, they'll go roughly near the middle of the paper. If someone has a 23, they'll go towards the top. Continue to slot in your players and then add in the monsters. Heck, you may even have some sense of the monsters that will be fought during a session, so feel free to pre-roll their initiative numbers to make things even faster during battle. On your sheet of paper, it's very simple to place check marks next to each name as you move through the order. It's easy to keep track of monster HP or those players who have an effect on them and how many rounds it'll last. Initiative really is as simple as that. Don't complicate or slow it down. Next, I want to discuss two things that can really kill a combat's pace mid-fight. The first is square counting, and the second is looking up rules. First, don't force a player to show you the exact path they wish to take in the hopes of springing something on them. That'll just make the player want to back up to try to find another path. If there is a safe path between their starting point and the destination, assume that the character takes it. If there is not a safe path, then don't quibble over the squares. Instead, provide the player a simple choice. You can get there if you take an opportunity attack from the goblin, or you can avoid the goblin and get there with a double move. What do? Done. Quick and simple. Second, the rules are the tool by which a DM determines the outcome of the player's actions. The players are supposed to be role-playing themselves into the minds of their characters, making decisions they think that their character would take. As such, during gameplay, the DM should be the only one who handles rules. A player should know ahead of time what rules apply to their character and its abilities. It's totally fine if they want to have references on hand at the table. Every spellcaster at our table actually has spell note cards as reminders for what their spells do and how they work. Once at the table, if a player doesn't know, then they should refer to the DM. The DM either knows the rules, can make a judgment call, or decide it's worth looking up in the book. That's for the DM to decide though. Simply put, the players need to come prepared and then need to rely on the DM for all other verdicts that fall in the in-between. When running combat, always keep in mind that it's supposed to be exciting, fast-paced, and tense. Unfortunately, a lot of D&D combat sessions are just the opposite due to pacing problems. We have to pause the action in order to check AC, roll damage, flip through the player's handbook. All of these little things start to add up quickly, and pretty soon our combats are moving at a snail's pace. And our players figure they have a good 5 to 10 minutes to check Facebook before they need to pay attention again. And you know what? That's on you as the DM. We've already discussed a couple ways to mitigate this problem, but it's your job to be in control of the flow of combats. Just like you set the pace for the rest of the gameplay outside of fighting, you need to keep the combat moving forward in order to keep the tension high and to keep the excitement high too. This will ultimately keep your players focused and engaged. Now, I'm not saying to throw out the rules of combat. You need to have the mechanics or there is no game. Just keep in mind that the mechanics don't move the game forward, so they should be dealt with in an efficient manner. The thing that does keep a game moving forward is narrative. And it's narrative that should be the bread that sandwiches the game mechanics in order to keep the combat's pace up. A lot of DMs will complain that their players don't describe their attacks enough. But guess what? They don't need to. No, seriously. The DM's job is to narrate, right? Why should this change for combat? All you need to know from your players is who they're attacking and what they're attacking with. I attack the bugbear to my left with my short sword. This gives you, the DM, the information you need in order to arbitrate the action and narrate the outcome. Remember, D&D is a role-playing game, not an acting session. As a reminder, role-playing is the process of making decisions in character. It means you examine the situation and decide how your character would act in it. On the other hand, actors, they have a script. The decision about what your character would do, those have already been made. The actor's job is simply to deliver the lines and perform the action convincingly. We want the former, not the latter. Remember that. Now, when I talk about combat narration, I'm generally talking about succinct descriptions. They should flow and be fast to keep up the pace. Remember, you're narrating something in combat. Think about the fight that's occurring and use your narration to describe what's actually going on. A miss doesn't have to be a miss. Perhaps the sword is parried by the combatant, blocked by a shield, or even glances off the armor. Maybe the nimble goblin darts out of the way to dodge the blow. Describing misses in this way makes it feel more realistic. Additionally, once a player finally lands a hit, it'll feel more rewarding to them because they were able to overcome a challenge and finally catch the slippery little goblin or land a blow near the joint where the enemy's armor is weakest. And hits? Those should give some sense of how badly a monster got hit by a blow based on the hit points they lost. An attack that deals 5 points of damage to a giant rat is nearly crippling, while it would be lucky to draw blood on an owlbear. As such, you wouldn't describe the hit on the owlbear as something that would be a fatal blow, like a spear driven straight through its gut. But that same description could be used if the attack was against the giant rat. Do you see where I'm going with this? Combat narration shouldn't be flowery, shouldn't be poetic. The goal is to convey information to the PCs about what's going on. It should be obvious what equipment the enemy is wearing or wielding, and it should be obvious whether a hit took out a bunch of points or was barely a scratch. In all this, informative narrative needs to be quick and to the point. Remember how I said a few minutes ago that narration should sandwich the game mechanics? That means that every player's turn should start and end with the DM narrating. At the beginning of combat, narration sets the stage. In between the player turns, it helps transition things between player initiative, and it reminds each player of the critical things that their character may want to attend to. In between rounds, narration provides a quick summary of all the moving pieces to again reset the scene. You see, It's important to remind players of the emergencies that are happening to them or near them. This urgent sensation is what emotionally engages the PCs because it makes battle tense and scary, which draws their focus. Consider the difference between the following two. Tilly, it's your turn. I thrust my rapier at the hobgoblin, 18 to attack. You hit the hobgoblin, roll for damage. 9 piercing. Ooh, nice roll. Isurus, you're up. Versus Tilly, the hobgoblins are charging the party. 2 with longbows are hanging back at a distance. What do? I thrust my rapier at the hobgoblin, 18 to attack. Damage, 9 piercing. You rush the hobgoblin and run your rapier through its shoulder, bringing it to a halt. Its allies are unsettled and they hesitate. Isurus, there's a moment's pause. What do? The difference between those two scenes is subtle, but did you hear how I used narration to set the scene and transition between player turns rather than just call out the player turns? The slight change makes all the difference to the mood of the battle. One keeps the players immersed in the excitement, and the other calls out that you're playing a game. I'll provide another example. Listen to the transitions. The kobold leaps aside, dodging your mace. He tries to dart past you to close with Ella. Roll an opportunity attack. 7. The goblin dodges at 2 and lunges at Ella with his short sword. Ella, you take 4 piercing damage. The other 2 goblins close on Holmgren and Alara. Tilly, the goblin steals his resolve after your blow and returns the favor with a thrust from his short sword. A crit! You take 12 damage. Ouch! The red dragon growls to the kobolds, "Stop the wizard!" before turning towards Holmgren and Alara and begins to draw a great breath. Tilly's taking heavy damage and both Holmgren and Alara are engaged head-on with goblins. Leaf, they don't seem to notice you hiding behind the tree. What do? Did you hear how the resolution of one action led into setting the scene for the next action? It'll take some practice, but once you get the hang of this, your battles will flow much smoother and all the players will be more engaged in the intense excitement of the fight. Did you also hear what I did with the green dragon at the end? I gave a cue that alluded to what the dragon's next action was going to be. This is similar to what video games do. Have you ever noticed that the big bads tend to give off a warning before unleashing a powerful attack? They wind up or shout out loud, or they give you, the player, a chance to make a decision in the split moment before you get walloped with that giant attack. Are you going to prepare to dodge out of the way? Do you need to drink a health potion? Are you feeling good and want to risk getting in an extra hit or two yourself, even if it means you might take some heavy damage? You see, video games offer this cue to empower players to make thought-provoking decisions within battle. If we didn't know when the monster was going to deploy his super attack, we'd likely just keep hacking and slashing away. We wouldn't use different tactics. You may argue this would make a battle easier, and it likely will, but I would argue that isn't a bad thing. If a fight is easier because a player makes the right choices at the right time, disengaging and dodging just before a breath weapon goes off, or using their best abilities when a monster is vulnerable, and so forth, then I would say that's a good, tactically smart fight. The player is going to feel satisfied and like they earned that win. Now, I don't suggest all my monsters' actions like this before they happen, but this can be a useful tactic to employ when you're running combats for bigger bosses or those who have stronger attacks. It allows players to get out of that hack and slash only mode. consider a fight against a dragon and his kobold minions. Does the party stay close together to protect their more squishy wizard and have everyone take the breath attack? Does the party maybe instead spread out to avoid everyone getting hit by the dragon's breath attack? Or does the party first engage all the kobolds and ignore the dragon, so when the dragon attacks, it can't use its breath attack without hurting its allies too? You see all the interesting choices that are available to the party if they know an attack is coming ahead of time. Side note though, please don't use this tactic to trick your players. That's just being cruel. The next thought ties into the queuing piece too. The other thing you may have noticed in my narrated combat scene is the fact of the monster team talking amongst themselves. No, they didn't sit and have a tactical conversation during the middle of battle, but they did shout a quick blurb to communicate with one another. This is something that happens in real combats. Having your intelligent monster teams do this is a great way to model this sort of behavior for the PCs, and they may, hopefully, start doing it amongst themselves too. Another thing you can do to players during combat to further keep them focused and engaged is to create pressure on them. When it's their turn, they need to start talking right away to tell you what they are doing. If they've been paying attention like they're supposed to, then they should know what's going on within the battle. You've transitioned into their turn using narration and made them aware of emergencies around them. This should be enough to kickstart their brain into making a decision. If they aren't ready and don't start talking, then you as the DM will take their turn for them. The default turn, if they don't act, is to ready a block. If you've never played using this style before, it may take a couple of rounds, but I promise you that your players will catch on quick, because once they lose a turn or two to inaction, they'll realize you mean business when you expect them to be engrossed in the battle at hand. If you want to ease everyone into this style of play, which I guarantee will improve the pacing of your games, then you can pass a player's turn, go to the next person, and then come back to them. This gives them a second chance to act before you go to the default of readying a block in their stead. Next, we need to discuss how combat ends. A fight can end in only one of three ways. Number one, the heroes are incapable of continuing the fight because, for example, they're dead. Two, the enemies are incapable of continuing the fight because, for example, they've been all put to sleep. Or three, both sides are unwilling to continue the fight. Even if one side decides to retreat, one of these three outcomes will still occur. If the PCs flee and the goblins don't pursue or give up the pursuit, both sides basically agreed the fight was over. If the goblins can't keep up, the goblins were unable to continue the fight even though they wanted to, and the fight is then over. If the goblins do keep up, the fight continues. You see, three options. The reason we're discussing this is because people often forget that option 3 exists. Most combats continue until one side is fully incapacitated. Remember, you know what the monsters want and why they're fighting. As such, every creature each round needs to ask itself, am I going to continue fighting this round? Without this consideration, option 3 can never happen. One side is going to completely die every time. Each round, you should look at the current situation. Does the monster think it can win? Does it have an opportunity or a reason to slip away? Is it willing to beg for its life? Is it willing to die fighting? You as the DM need to use common sense and your understanding of the creatures. An owlbear likely isn't willing to die trying to obtain food, but it will die defending its young. A bullywug might sense that the battle is turning against them and see an opportunity to slip away safely unnoticed, especially if it's already got loot or a captive to bring back to its king or queen. Your players may decide to slaughter them anyway, but that's their choice. Remember, it's their gameplay. But once they see enough creatures give up, flee, and then don't come back to haunt them, they'll likely start letting them get away. They'll be more open to that, especially if they know they're going to get the XP anyway. The last piece of advice I want to give you about fights is to play to win as the persona of the monsters. You've spent the time to build a fair fight. You know what the monsters want. You know their ideal strategies, what they are, how they're going to fight. The PCs have every opportunity to create victory through their own strategic decisions. Don't let that fall apart by having the monsters not fight their best. The game of D&D is not built to let you win, so it's safe to try. Don't let all your effort go to waste by not having the monsters do their best. And just as the PCs switch up their strategies based on the current situation, so too can the monsters. Even though it's their strongest tactical strategy, a cohort of goblins is not going to stay in their wall formation if they're getting creamed by a wizard at range. They're going to reassess the situation and try something else. Maybe they're going to break up into smaller groups so they're not all clumped together. Or they're going to have maybe one or two goblins peel off and go pick up their crossbows or sound an alarm to bring out the rest of the legion and rouse some backup reinforcement. This ties into that feedback loop we talked about previously. When you're designing an encounter or a battle within an encounter, you need to have some sort of idea of what comes before or after. What happens if that alarm is sounded? When, where, and how strong is the next line of defense, and so forth. Well, there you have it, DMs. 4 total videos on designing, building, and playing out combat. I hope you learned something from this mini-series and your future battles are more exciting and engaging for everyone at the table. Do you have additional tips related to building and running combats? I'd love to hear them, so please drop them down below in the comments. Are there other topics you'd like us to do a mini-series on? Let us know that too. Until next week, happy combat building.